If you or a loved one had a stroke, you're in the right place. Hi, I'm Elyse, an occupational therapist and certified stroke rehab specialist. Today, I'll cover what to expect as you move forward in your recovery journey with lots of practical tips and resources so that you can continue to make progress. Let's dive in. First, let's cover some of the basics. What is a stroke? Well, essentially, it's when a part of the brain is starved of oxygen, and that results from a lack of blood flow to a specific area of the brain. This usually happens in one of two ways: an ischemic stroke, which is a blockage in an artery that's usually caused by a blood clot or maybe plaque, and then also a hemorrhagic stroke, which is usually caused by a brain bleed. What are the most common symptoms? Up to 80% of survivors will experience one-sided weakness or paralysis, and a large percentage of survivors will also experience spasticity. And this is where there is increased muscle tone, especially in response to quick movements. Shoulder subluxation is also fairly common, and it is caused by a partial dislocation of that large arm bone, the humerus, out of the shoulder socket. You may also see speech and communication issues, either trouble getting words out, understanding things being said, or a mixture of both. You may see sensation changes, which is where you may have trouble detecting certain types of sensation, or you may be hypersensitive to things that you used to not be sensitive to, like bright lights, loud noises, and crowds. Neurofatigue is another common symptom, and it's very different from regular fatigue. Neurofatigue may make you feel like your limbs have been injected with concrete. You may also deal with chronic pain after your stroke, whether it's related to a joint issue like shoulder subluxation, or it's due to sensory changes where you have that kind of pins and needles feeling. You will likely see balance and coordination issues, trouble picking up your foot, which can make it hard to walk safely, and cognitive changes like issues with short-term memory or planning and organizing. Emotional and personality changes are also fairly common after stroke. And if you also experience mental health changes like anxiety and depression, know that you're not alone. Around 25 to 30% of survivors experience these issues, and it's really important to recognize that you're not a failure for feeling those things. Having a stroke is extremely traumatic, and mental health changes is a normal response to that. What kind of rehab will I get? Well, after the stroke happens, you will likely be transferred to someplace like a rehab hospital or a rehab wing in a skilled nursing facility. After you get home, you may continue with home health therapy or outpatient therapy if you have someone to drive you to your appointments or if you're driving yourself. You'll likely have 3 different types of therapy while you're in the hospital, and that includes physical therapy, which will of course work on the physical movements, getting you back on your feet and walking. You will probably have occupational therapy that may also work with you on exercises, dexterity, fine motor, as well as making sure that you're safe enough to do everyday activities. And you may also have speech therapy, especially if you have speech or communication issues, but also if you have cognitive changes like problems with your memory. Speech therapy also works on cognitive changes after stroke. How long is recovery? Well, it's really different for every single person. Every survivor and stroke is different. It depends on where the stroke happened in the brain, how severe it was, how much help you got in those first few hours after your stroke, the type of stroke that you had, and how much rehab you were able to get afterwards. For some people, recovery may take place within weeks or months, whereas for others, it will be a lifelong journey. Is 100% recovery possible? By 100%, I mean back to your pre-stroke self. For a small percentage of survivors, they will say that yes, they are back to their pre-stroke self. But I would say for the majority of stroke survivors, they continue to deal with some lingering effects even years down the road. And I don't see this to be disheartening because you will not know how much progress that you can make unless you try. But typically there are still some lingering issues, maybe difficulty lifting up the foot, some continued one-sided weakness, ongoing spasticity, and trying different things to treat that. The 1-year myth. Unfortunately, the myth that stroke recovery stops after 1 year continues to be perpetuated in the healthcare field. And I know many healthcare providers say this because they don't want to provide false hope to someone. But I have seen anecdotally in my work and in many studies that are starting to come out that stroke recovery can continue to happen even years down the road. While it is true that you may see the fastest recovery in the first, say, 6 months up to 1 year, it doesn't mean that your recovery will stop. It might slow down after that point, but you can continue to see progress even after that 1 year mark. The 7 stages of recovery. If you have experienced muscle tone changes where your arm is kind of limp and flaccid to very spastic and tight, the 7 stages of recovery walks through the different stages of stroke recovery in terms of muscle tone, from that flaccidity, that limpness right after your stroke, to increasing spasticity and then hopefully resulting normal movement. But it's important to note that stroke survivors don't necessarily move linearly through these stages from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You may tend to hop around, you may develop more spasticity, or you may go straight to normal movement. It's all very dependent on each individual person. It's also important to note that stroke survivors can get stuck in one of these stages. Sometimes you may see that you kind of stay in that flaccid stage, or you potentially start to develop spasticity and get stuck there. However, some may return to that normal movement or that 7th stage. What does better look like in stroke recovery? A stroke is a neurological injury. It is very different from a purely physical injury like a broken leg. There is no linear trajectory of what recovery is going to look like. Every stroke and every stroke survivor is vastly different in how they've been impacted and how they heal. Stroke recovery is also a marathon, not a sprint. And this is helpful to understand when people around you ask, "Oh, you had a stroke? Aren't you better yet?" Usually the answer is no, I am recovering. I am still recovering, because brains do not heal in the same way that bones do. Recovery tips. Tip number 1, neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is currently the best tool that we have to facilitate stroke recovery progress. And if you're unfamiliar with what that is, here's a brief explanation. Neuroplasticity is essentially our brain's ability to adapt, reorganize, and make new connections. And this is especially important after a brain injury like a stroke. When a stroke happens, a part of the brain becomes damaged or dies. And so the functions that those cells are responsible for also go offline. Neuroplasticity allows the brain to remake connections to bring those functions back online. And stroke rehab professionals typically refer to a 2008 article by Kleiman Jones that outlined the 10 principles of neuroplasticity. I'm not gonna go through all of those in detail, but let me go through a few. Of course, you've probably heard use it or lose it, meaning use the functions that you have so that you don't lose them. Use what you have to improve it. Also focus on repetition, repetition, repetition. We need hundreds, if not thousands of repetitions for our brain to make meaningful connections. And we also need to focus on things that are salient to us or things that are important to us. Our brain prioritizes these pathways, and it's really important if we want to see progress to do things that we find valuable. Tip number 2, things to avoid. The first thing you need to avoid is something called learned non-use. And this is where you learn to not use your affected abilities. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you have got one-sided weakness and it's primarily affecting your arm and your hand. It is likely easier and faster for you to get dressed when you're not really focusing on using that arm and that hand, but you're doing yourself a disservice. When you don't use those affected abilities, you lose them. The first principle of neuroplasticity. And if you have no movement at all, that doesn't mean you can't still do things like mental practice, which is where you practice something in your brain. There's actually a lot of research behind it. The second thing that you need to avoid is comparison to others. And this is really hard to do because as humans, we are hardwired to compare and measure up ourselves to other people. However, every stroke survivor and every recovery journey is different. Comparing yourself can be very detrimental to your recovery because it sets you up for unrealistic expectations and can really bring down your mood. The last thing you need to avoid is doing the same thing in your recovery routine week after week after week. While plateaus and backslides are a normal part of the recovery process, you can get stuck in them if you don't switch up your recovery routine. So try to keep things fresh. Try new exercises, try new activities every week or every other week to continue making progress in your recovery journey. Tip number 3, things you need. The first thing you need is patience and hope. I've mentioned this before, but stroke recovery is a marathon and not a sprint. It is unfortunately something that happens slowly and it does not happen overnight. So having patience with your brain and your body, while extremely difficult to do, is extremely important. And having hope. While false hope is never good, and I would never tell someone you can expect a full 100% recovery, it is important to hope in what you can accomplish. Because truly, no one will know how much progress that you can make unless you try. The second thing you need is support. Having a stroke is an extremely traumatic event, and it can feel like it's turned your life upside down. Having support from friends, family, and other loved ones can be invaluable, whether they're there to take you to get groceries or go to medical appointments, or just someone to talk to. The third thing you need is a home exercise routine. If you're lucky enough to be in traditional therapy, it's great that you might be getting, an hour or two of therapy a week. However, it's going to take more than that to really see progress in your recovery journey. So having structured exercises that you can do daily or weekly is very important to see continued progress. The last thing you need are daily activities as part of your home rehab. While exercises are really important and you can't leave those out, there are things that we need to do day to day, like turning on light switches, opening doors, brushing our teeth, and getting dressed. Make them a part of your rehab program so that if you have trouble buttoning buttons, instead of avoiding button-up shirts, maybe you actually try wearing them and practicing buttoning on a daily basis. Tip number 4, secondary stroke prevention. After a stroke, fear of having another stroke is one of the top concerns I hear from stroke survivors, and rightfully so. Having a stroke is a life-threatening traumatic event in your life. It is normal to feel a lot of anxiety about having another one. So doing what you can to take care of yourself to prevent a second stroke is extremely important. And that might include making sure that you're taking all the medications that your doctor has prescribed, following up with your doctor on a regular basis, making sure that you're changing any lifestyle factors that contributed to your stroke. Maybe you need to get better quality and quantity of sleep. Make sure that you're eating nutritious foods most of the time. Check in and see, are you getting enough physical activity during your days and weeks? And if you're a smoker, stop. There's just no other way to get around it. And if you drink alcohol, make sure to cut back your consumption. If you never drank alcohol, don't start now. And if you drank a lot, cut back. Tip number 5, treat your mental health. Anxiety and depression are fairly common in stroke survivors, and it's really important that you make sure not to ignore these issues if you're experiencing them. Talk with your doctor to see if there are any medications that you should try, or if you need to be referred to a counselor to talk through what you're feeling. Because mental health changes like anxiety and depression can actually impede your progress. So make your mental health a priority in your recovery journey, not only so that you can see more progress, but so that you can feel better too. Recovery resources. I want to make sure that you have got what you need to be successful in your home recovery journey. So I've actually created a new playlist that I will be linking down in the description called You Had a Stroke, Start Here. And it is a compilation of videos covering in depth all of the topics that I briefly touched on today, from secondary stroke prevention, neurofatigue, how long stroke recovery is, the 7 stages of stroke recovery, and on and on. This is gonna give you more in-depth and detailed coverage of each of those topics if you're interested in exploring them further. I am also leaving a link to my workout playlist, from upper body workouts, working on arm movement even if you don't have any, working on lifting the arm, on dexterity. I'm linking to lower body workout playlists, working on seated leg strengthening, balance, coordination, and even walking workouts. And I'm also leaving links to my spasticity stretching workouts for arm, hand, hips, ankles, and lower body, so that you have a place to start when it comes to your home exercise routines. However, always check with your doctor or therapist to make sure any new exercises or routines are right for you. I hope that this video gives you a better understanding of strokes and what to expect as you move forward in your recovery journey. Remember that progress is a marathon, not a sprint. Go at your own pace. Be kind to yourself. Practice patience and hope, and engage in some type of therapy activity or exercise every day. You got this. As always, if you found this video helpful, please make sure to leave it a like. And if you're new here or haven't already, subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get notifications for when I post new videos. Post Stroke is a nonprofit, and you can help us keep our content free. either by giving us a super thanks by clicking in the YouTube bar below, by giving us a one-time donation via PayPal, or by becoming a Patreon member, in which a monthly donation gets you access to cool perks like social media shoutouts, behind the scenes footage, and even YouTube shoutouts, of which I have a few today. A huge thank you to all of our patrons, and especially Heather G and Modus Nova in our Empowerer tier. We can't do what we do without you all. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time.